Welcome to the Darkstream, Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and unauthorized.tv. Thanks for tuning in tonight. And Bolster, he does this thing and he does it fast. So, I haven't been playing the intro because I actually have it, but I'm not sure how it would, whether you'd actually get sound or not here. So we're skipping that until we're back in the back at the castle. What's going on in Barcelona? More riots, more protests. Tomorrow is a general strike. I think they said something about 25 to 30% of all public transportation is going to be completely shut down. So that's interesting. Of absolutely zero concern to us, other than I'm afraid that I won't be hitting the Taco Bell. So, c'est la vie. That's a little disappointing, but sometimes you have to make accommodations for secessionist movements. The thing that's kind of crazy about it is, and I talked about this back when, on the blog, back when there was the initial election or the referendum. And think about this. Both the Union of Great Britain, or the Union of Great Britain, which is to say the Union of England and Scotland, is older than the United States. The Union of Catalonia to Spain is even older than that. Given that these things are starting to break up, why on earth would we ever assume that the United States is not going to go the same way? The socionomics teaches us that when times are easy, people are soft, people are open-minded, people are inclined to accept outsiders and others, and that's where you see all of this unity nonsense. Once that peaks and it begins to go the other way, and obviously we are post-peak, then it's clear that things start to break up, things start to break apart. Relating to the notifications, I don't have my notification list here, so that's why I haven't been sending it out to the members. As far as why they're not going out via YouTube, that I don't know. I actually got this stream scheduled, 45 minutes, an hour in advance. So the belief in the magic dirt is fading away. And that's a professional segue to the topic, which is the fact, the observation, that evangelical leaders in the United States are geopolitical morons. Somebody directed me earlier to an amazingly ridiculous article by Joel C. Rosenberg. And he's one of those guys who's made a living, predicting the end times and all that sort of thing. And it's just total nonsense. He's talking here saying, going from bad to worse, Russia creates alliance with Iran and Turkey. Russia did not create an alliance with Iran and Turkey. They've been allied with them for a long, long time. Now, obviously, Russia has a complicated history with Turkey, considering they have fought many, many wars. But where do you think Turkey got all of the Russian equipment that it has? Where do you think Iran got it? They've been loosely allied for years, and the reason that the alliance is becoming tighter is because of the misbehavior of, number one, the United States, and number two, Israel. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. It's a reaction. And it says Trump abandons the Kurds. The Kurds are not our allies. Turkey is literally the U.S. ally here. If anything, the U.S. has an obligation to attack the Kurds because they attacked Turkey. Allies, words, and this is evangelical leaders speak out. It's a mess. It's not a mess. It's just going very badly for the neo-clowns for whom the evangelical leaders have been cucking for the last 20 years. So he says, the Turkish offensive into northern Syria is a dangerous military development. It's really not. The emerging Russian-Iranian-Turkish alliance is a dangerous geopolitical development. It's really not. And President Trump's willingness to so easily abandon America's Kurdish allies, again, the Kurds are not America's allies. Turkey is America's ally. And it wasn't easily abandoning anything. The U.S. had they didn't even have 1,500 troops there. You know what they call that in military terms? A speed bump. The U.S. troops were only there in order to try to dissuade people from running over them. But at no point in time did they have any ability to prevent it. It's a dangerous diplomatic development that could have serious domestic political repercussions if Trump and his team are not more careful. This is total nonsense. I'm glad that VP Pence and Secretary of State Pompeo are heading to the region to try to persuade Turkish President Erdogan to call off the offensive. Erdogan is not going to call off the offensive because of the U.S. any more than Assad was going to stop trying to hold on to his country because of the U.S. The reason that the Turkish offensive has stopped is because Putin decided to stop it by moving some Russian troops in the way. Recep Erdogan is not a serious, trustworthy ally. Well, he is the only actual ally involved here. The U.S. has a treaty obligation to defend Turkey, its fellow NATO ally, as do the rest of the NATO alliance. He's an Islamist who supports Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood terror movements. This is news. A few years ago, he arrested upwards of 200,000 Turks in a brazen crackdown on his political enemies. Do you know what that brazen crackdown was? That brazen crackdown was his response to a U.S. CIA-sponsored coup. Now keep this in mind. At the time, Russia and Turkey were having serious differences. In fact, the Turks had actually shot down a Russian jet. The Russian pilot was killed. There were serious discussions about what Putin's response would be. And then the CIA attempted to, they attempted to sponsor a Gulen-led coup. Gulen is this Muslim cleric who lives in the United States, who has a fairly widespread movement in Turkey. And they attempted to initiate a coup, which, by the way, it's believed that Putin alerted Erdogan to, thus saving him. The roots of the Turkish-Russian alliance are because the U.S. tried to overthrow the Turkish government. So all of this situation, including the situation with the Kurds in Syria, and what's going on in Iraq and Islamic State, all of that is the result of U.S. activity. Trump is doing the only sensible thing, the first sensible thing that has been done in the region for a long time, which is getting the U.S. out of it. So, I struggle to understand how Erdogan is still a member of NATO. Well, it's pretty simple. Once the Turks get kicked out of NATO, they become full-fledged, open allies of Iran, and they will probably take a much stronger anti-Israel position than they currently are. And keep in mind, it wasn't that long ago that the Turks were considered to be kind of quiet allies of Israel. That has changed. Why? Because of Syria. Let's see. I spoke with an Israeli reporter for Haaretz who was stunned that various evangelical leaders, myself included, were speaking out so strongly on the subject. They are stunned because they're idiots. He says, Trump didn't think he could ever lose the evangelical vote, but then he abandoned the Kurds. The average evangelical voter doesn't give a single flying fuck about the Kurds, nor should they. It's not a Christian issue. It has literally nothing to do with Christianity in any way, shape, or form. It's total nonsense. Why on earth would evangelicals care about it? The only reason they do is because they are servants of the neoclowns. The Kurds are essentially Israeli proxy troops, not unlike the U.S. forces there. And so, it's absolute and total nonsense. Any evangelical who is falling for this stuff needs to learn that Donald Trump can be trusted. The evangelical leaders cannot. They absolutely cannot. The Kurds are not Christians, and in fact are chiefly known for being involved in the Armenian genocide, and they participated in the mass slaughter of Armenian Christians. So it's absolutely ridiculous. There is absolutely no evangelical Christian element to this situation at all, and whoever came up with the Cordeo Christ meme deserves to be saluted, because that's hilarious. The Kurds are not innocent victims. The situation with Turkey is very similar to if the Mexican cartels were to engage in regular attacks on the U.S. military inside the U.S. and then would retreat across into Mexico. One of the things that the Kurds are known for, and in fact they already did in this most recent situation, is something that Tom Kratman wrote about dating back to 1991. He was over there, and at least twice he witnessed the Kurds firing on a Turkish position, trying to bait the Turks into firing back and shooting at the British and shooting at the American troops. That already happened. They were complaining recently, there were complaints a couple days ago, that the Turks had fired on American troops. Guess why? The Kurds had fired on the Turks. The Turks fired back, and some of it came close to American troops. That's it. So, anyhow, but the important thing about this, the important thing to keep in mind is that evangelical leaders should not be trusted. They are all absolutely massive cucks. They do not speak for God. They do not speak for American Christians. And they should not be trusted by anyone, least of all Americans who are actually evangelical Christians. Seth Smith is correct. The more Christian thing to do would be to stand with al-Assad's government. Hey, Big Bear just showed up. He just landed in America, and he had a blast with us in Spain. We did actually have a blast. It was fantastic. It was kind of funny because I was standing outside with the Big Bear, and we were talking, and there was a fairly loud party going on, and I said, I think they may be having more fun than us. And he looked at me and said, no, they're really not. They're just louder. That was pretty funny. So, anyhow, it's going to be an exciting year. I think that, we had a really great year in 2019 so far. And I think that, the amount of crushing that we're going to do in 2020 is going to make 2019 look pedestrian. A lot of the stuff that we're just beginning to do now is the fruit of the things that we were planning to do and beginning to execute on. And so, we're improving our teams, we're upping our games, we're learning how to work with each other, and more and more people are seeing the truth in what we're saying and seeing the truth in what we're discussing. Just like what we're talking about tonight. Look at how many of you knew anything about the Kurds at all. And now you're going away realizing, these are hardcore commies who even the local Arabs think are crazy. And they are not U.S. allies, and the God Emperor has not betrayed them. Remember, the mainstream media always lies. If they're telling you something about which you know nothing, don't just accept it because you don't know anything. Assume that they are lying because you know they are liars. What do liars normally do? They lie. Speaking of lying, it was interesting to hear that Jordan Peterson's daughter unfortunately decided to leave her husband. But at least we've been assured that the reason for this marital breakup was definitely not meth. Whatever the reason might be, it was not meth. So I'm glad that we're able to keep that straight. Very important. To be honest, I couldn't care less. I think that it's it's definitely not meth. Might have been something else though. Yeah. 12, and it definitely wasn't STDs, unless it was. It's Big Bear definitely called that one. And here's a hint for all the insta-hoes out there, and all the players and all the pickup artists. What you should not do is provide everyone a list of your prescriptions on your videos. That's where all of these herpes references are being made in the comments. Peterson's daughter was doing a stream and happened to show a list of some of her many chemical prescriptions, and at least 2 of them are drugs that are known for treating herpes. What can you say? I mean, I'm sorry, but that's both funny and stupid and sad. But if somebody's going to do that, you can't feel bad about the fact that she just went and handed all of Peterson's critics a hammer. But, now we know why you're supposed to take your pills. Catalonian independence is a nationalist movement. Catalonia actually has their own language. They consider themselves to be a separate nation, a separate people. Not everybody does, but looks like my camera froze or something. Chat's still going. Let's see what we got here. Are we frozen here too? Stream health is good according to this. So, you can hear me. Okay, that's good. Can you also see me? Are you getting a frozen image, or is it... Okay, let me try turning it on and off. Well, we got frozen video, so that's okay. We don't need to stop. We can just keep going. Just think of it as a virtual podcast. So, yeah, at least it didn't stop with my mouth open or something. No, it's probably just something to do with my laptop. Not the biggest deal in the world. The thing is, the Catalonians are historically, let's just say, extreme. And so, this is the sort of thing that tests whether we are actually genuinely omni-nationalists. Now, I do support Catalonian independence if that's what the people want. But, I don't think that the independent nation that they would run would be a place that I would want to live or spend very much time. They've always been to the extreme left of Spain, and one of the things that they're fairly bitter about is the civil war, and Madrid was always the center of Franco's power and the right wing. So it's a test of our principles, and I think it's a pretty easy test to pass because either you support nationalism or you don't. You can't just say, I only support nationalism that I approve of. Nations, that that I think are going to rule themselves according to an ideology that I support. What's the best book on the Spanish Civil War? I actually like Anthony Beevor's book. He's a lefty, so you need to keep that in mind, but he, I think, presents a relatively fair presentation of Franco and the right. I think he, to a certain extent, was somewhat horrified by the extremes to which the communists went. Yeah, I mean, the Catalonian separatists are more or less socialist. Are Ukrainians a nationality? They seem to think so. I don't see any reason not to, the Russians certainly don't consider them to be exactly the same as them. Yeah, I think Beevor is spelled Beevor, but I could be wrong. What can we learn from Franco? I think the most important thing to learn from Franco is that you must take action at the appropriate time, and you must be decisive. One of the things that you learn from reading military history is how often people had the power to act decisively, but they failed to do so, and their failure to do so at the appropriate time meant that they were unable to act later. So, I left the EF. Yeah. What we're going to see, because we are past the point of peak optimism, because we're moving away from R and towards K, if you prefer that term, then you need to, more and more unions are going to break up. Marcus, the Death of Rats, has a good question. It seems all the genuine nationalists are more on the left than the right. What does this tell us? Well, it tells us that they are more practical. All of these cucks who are, it's kind of funny because people who are conservative like to tell themselves that they're practical, they're pragmatic, they're realistic. And yet the myths to which they subscribe are more fundamentally powerful and delusory than those of the left. Was Franco the greatest European leader of the 20th century? He was one of the greatest. He kept his people out of war. He refused, to establish a dictatorial succession plan. Although I don't think that his succession plan that he came up with was optimal. So, no, Owen did not shave his head. Anthony says, the teens won't eat wife's organic crappy peanut butter anymore, only Jif. I proclaim innocence and maintain operational secrecy. Very wise. Very wise. Franco was, that's a different Franco. If we're talking Me Too, we're talking a different Franco altogether. And there's a second, I see, his successor was assassinated on his way to Mass. Well, that would explain why the succession plan didn't work out so well. Was Hitler right in intent but wrong in action? No, Hitler was absolutely wrong in action. I find it very frustrating that people like to use that rhetoric, Hitler did nothing wrong. Hitler was a complete disaster for the German people. His whole desire for Lebensraum and his dream of conquering Europe and destroying the Slavs were absolutely and utterly evil. So you simply can't the fact that he might have had some positive objectives and might have achieved some positive things doesn't make him intrinsically good in any way, shape, or form. Why does white chocolate always have to share cookies with macadamia? It doesn't. Think outside the box, Christopher. Are the people of Hong Kong distinct enough from the Chinese to be considered a different nation? No, definitely not. Definitely and absolutely not. Hong Kong is China. Hong Kong is Chinese. Remember, the official position of Hong Kong is one nation, two governments, or two systems. And even that arrangement it has a time limit on it and expires in 2050. It was interesting because I talked to a number of people from Hong Kong recently, some Chinese, some Western, and it was fascinating to discover that their sympathies are more with the mainland than with the Hong Kong protesters, who frankly appear to be nothing more than another CIA-sponsored color revolution. It's a tremendously bad idea to be trying to disrupt China in this way, because no one buys the whole, we just want freedom and democracy anymore. If you want freedom and democracy, bring it to Europe. Bring it to Britain. The Scots want independence. The Catalonians want independence, and they have democratically voted for it. Remember, the Scottish referendum for independence actually passed with regards to the vote of the Scottish people. Sure, a lot of English people and other foreigners living in Scotland voted against it, but they're not part of the Scottish nation. Can we trust that Hitler wanted to exterminate Slavic people, though? Yes. Unlike all of the theoretical programs to exterminate the Jewish people, there are actual Nazi records of the German plan to occupy and get rid of a lot of the Slavic people. They were, as the German records often are, incredibly detailed. That's one of the significant arguments against the Holocaust theory. The fact that there are no detailed German records of it. Why on earth would they keep their plans and not get rid of their plans? The obvious explanation is, well, they destroyed all those records because they were, they knew they were going to lose and they didn't want it to come out. Well, it's kind of funny they didn't destroy all the plans to, commit genocide on a much larger scale, right? Asparagus Bear says, Vox, I heard Advil comes in espresso flavor now. They must be listening. Maybe. I'm a little skeptical that they're really listening the way they should be, because if they were listening, then Nespresso would come in canela. So I've started a whole movement, and I've got an inside fifth column actually inside Nespresso working for that, but we'll see. Those protesters are waving the blue Hong Kong ensign and U.S. flags. Are they stupid or is it false flag? It's both. Would Castelia consider publishing a non-converged dictionary? Certainly. Dr. Jeep says Asians are not capable of handling democracy. Well, Americans clearly are not capable of handling it either. That's why the Founding Fathers set up a republic that was meant to strictly limit the influence of democracy. General Plan Ost, Greg Johnson claims that is a post-war fabrication. I don't think that's correct. Will anyone recognize a free Catalonia? I don't believe anyone has. Let's do some super chats here. Let's see. Oops, wrong. There we go. Okay. Have you met Winston Churchill? Well, I apparently met the second coming of him. If so, thoughts on when he will lead his countrymen to storm the sandcastles? Well, I think it's only a matter of time. Oh, he's clearly up to something. Hi, Vox. Having trouble finding the Christian view on how an enemy is different from the wicked, even though I think one can be both. Do you mind giving me some perspective on the matter? Thanks always. An enemy is someone whose objectives are directly opposed to your own. The wicked are those whose objectives and behavior are directly opposed to God. So someone who is opposed to you can be opposed to God. But you are not God, so therefore your enemy may or may not be wicked. And your enemy, the motivations that make him, or the motivations and objectives that make him your enemy, may not stem from his wickedness, even if he is both. So hopefully that helps. Ukrainian Bear says, Vox, what author would you recommend on the topic of Cossacks or Eastern European history? I couldn't possibly tell you. I did particularly enjoy the famous biography of Peter the Great. I actually read that at least twice, and it's very good, and it's a good starting point. You know, from there you can look at the bibliography and so forth. But I'm not an expert, so I want to learn history from good sources. Yeah, go as directly to the original sources as you can. That's the basic rule. We have M. Bolster having done his thing. Thank you. Vox, are all your books available in store available in South Africa? Yes. You just you might have to order them, but any major bookseller that has access to the Ingram catalog has access to our books. Mark W. sent the equivalent of $1 from the UK. Thank you. And let me see if that covers it all. Where were the Hong Kong protests when the turnover happened? Exactly. It looks like they want to be run by people who look like them, but with Anglo-Saxon governance. Yeah, I mean, the protests have nothing to do with what the mainstream media tells you it is. The real reason that people are protesting in Hong Kong is because Hong Kong has been left behind. This is also why the Chinese military is probably not going to interfere. Hong Kong simply isn't anywhere nearly as important to China as it used to be. You know, it's been surpassed by the Chinese coastal cities, and you know, it's still important, but it's not of vital importance the way that it used to be believed to be. And so, like all places and groups of people that are seeing their status and influence decline, they are unhappy about this. You know, one of the things that the people from Hong Kong that we talked to shared was that it's really, really difficult for the people of Hong Kong to accept that the people of China are richer than they are now. It drives them crazy, especially when rich Chinese tourists show up and are buying out their stores and acting like they're betters. That's where this significant change has happened. My shield is discussed. And was there a literary successor to Robert E. Howard? I don't believe so. Not that I've seen, anyhow. I mean, if you look at the extent of his influence with his pulp fiction, is literally pulp fiction, and how his characters still resonate today, it's really incredible. Even minor characters like Solomon Kane are significant enough to support entire movie franchises. That's just astonishing. Did Rothbard get red-pilled later in his life when he started to speak against immigration and Jewry? Yeah, I believe so. He was too honest. He had too much intellectual integrity to not see some of the flaws in his theoretical thinking. It's to his credit that he did so. I respect Rothbard a lot for that. Alex Jones thinks Trump will be assassinated tonight. I disagree. I'm sure you've spoken on the what ifs before. Sorry, but what would happen next if he was? I'm not going to address that because I don't believe it's going to happen. I don't believe, I think that what we're seeing now are the early elements of the storm hitting the swamp. These large-scale arrests from around the world, the pullbacks on Syria. He has been the greatest president of the last 150 years easily. I think he's been the greatest American president since Andrew Jackson. I'm not at all interested in entertaining or listening to, people engaging in professional drama just to attract attention, because that's frankly all I believe it is. No, Marcus, you're completely wrong. I think it's safe to say that people from there are a different nation. No, they're not. They're absolutely not, and they don't believe themselves to be. See, what you don't realize is that you believe in magic dirt. Under British rule, they were exposed to a totally different civilization and society than the rest of China. So what? They're still Chinese. You're making exactly the same mistake people who believe the way you do are the same people who believe that we should just bring 1 million Kurds to the U.S. and turn them into real Americans. That won't work either. Concerned trolls are very concerned. Yeah, exactly. Dr. Jeep says, one of the perks of being an Omega is our guts are always wrong, which is true. So we learn to use raw logic and chess-like thinking. Well, yes, which is useful to a certain extent, except when you then apply it to irrational, illogical people, and you don't have the ability to develop rules for that. That's the issue. Then why do you consider the Palestinians to be a different nation? Because they're not Jews? Because they're not Israelis? Is the antagonistic behavior of our current elites due in part to them knowing how unqualified they are to be in such high positions? I think that influences it. Palestinians are Arabs. you're about to get banned just for being a complete retard. I mean, you don't seem to grasp that Hong Kong is part of China. It's part of the Chinese nation. The Palestinians are part of the Arab people. But, Arabs are tribal in a way that the Chinese are not. Just try not to cling to your assumptions on this stream. All right? Why did Putnam and Huntington never go fully to the right and remain civ-nats after they came to their conclusions about immigration? Because no one, except for a complete sociopath, is capable of completely digging up their old assumptions. Is there a single question that you could use to ID a gamma in a one-on-one conversation? I think so. Is former White House aide Scaramucci a gamma? Maybe in relative terms, but in general, no, I don't think so. Bob Bonaparte says, the Chinese are more based than the entire West. I'm not sure about that. I think the Chinese leadership may be, but, when you look at the Hungarians, if you look at Viktor Orban, you look at some of the leaders in Eastern Europe and that sort of thing, I think they're doing fine. I think they're very based. The difference is that, and this is something that someone pointed out, in order to get to the head of the Communist Party in China, you have to be extremely intelligent and extremely competent. It really is a meritocracy, and you don't get anywhere near the top unless you actually have a long track record of success in various executive positions. That's very, very different than the system in the US, where your advancement is basically whether you have been deemed to be acceptable and groomed by the right money people. So, the ruthless meritocracy of China is very important because it tends to produce extremely effective leaders. The most effective leader of the 20th century, now that I think about it, was not Franco, but was Lee Kuan Yew, the founder of Singapore. And he successfully managed a tremendously difficult situation. He's extremely smart, had a deep understanding of a broad range of subjects, and he said that the current president of China, Xi, is the most gifted leader that he's ever seen. And so that's why, if you have 1.3 billion people led by a very intelligent, very effective leader, that's when you see historical things happen. What question would you ask Lee Kuan Yew if you met him? I don't know. I have to think about that. I need to read more of his books really before I can say anything. So what question would I ask a gamma to identify himself? Let me think about this for a second. I would say, what is the reason for your greatest failure? That's what I would say. And I think that the gamma is going to explain that his greatest failure was not actually a failure? um, let's see here. Baron, yeah, I should mention that. If you haven't checked out the Junior Classics campaign, please do so. It's actually over 500% of goal now, and I'm very pleased to see so many people are so interested in that. There is a link to it underneath this video. There's another question about that, which is why I brought it up. Any estimate on the retail price for the Junior Classics, assuming you sell them for retail? The retail price is probably going to be very similar to the crowdfunding price. So I think that they're implicitly priced at $34.99. It would probably be, we might price them at $39.99 a piece, but then give a discount for the set. So, but it's going to be a similar price. Deb Davis gets it. I think a good tactic for rooting out gammas would be stating that Monty Python is overrated, and then judge the length of the rant. Yeah, if you get a wall of text back, you're definitely dealing with a gamma. Would I be a gamma if I wouldn't openly tell you my greatest failures? Well, it all depends on how you refuse to do so. Yes, we do ship worldwide. There's no additional cost. So back away. Well, Fuber says he will consider something relatively minor to be his greatest failure instead of what an objective. Not necessarily. I mean, we're all capable of minimizing and that sort of thing. And you've always got those smart boys who, think they're being clever by saying, my greatest weakness is that I care too much or that I work too hard or that kind of nonsense. But what's the age demographic for the Junior Classics? 6 to 16. So if your kids are smart and homeschooled, 5 to 15. Yeah, Anthony's got a good point. I would ask a gamma what he thinks of the jocks. If he hates them, that's a sign he's a gamma. And that's definitely true. Definitely true. That is amusing. How beneficial would it be for a Christian to memorize the Bible? Well, I don't think that's entirely possible. Memorizing Bible verses, I think, is a good thing to do. I mean, it's good just memorizing texts anyhow, but memorizing the Bible is particularly advantageous. Yeah, Callista bears a good point. You can just ask any attractive woman in the room. Women have very, very sensitive gamma radar. So, all right. Well, that's all we've got for tonight. So thanks for tuning in. Sorry about the video going out, but at least it kept going on the audio. So we'll look forward to seeing you the next time. This is the Darkstream. I'm Vox Day.